In this video I show how I tried to make a table saw with a homemade lift using the arm of my old miter saw. This is the table structure that I made in a previous video. I screwed to it that vertical piece of board. I only used one screw in the top and one in the bottom. I cut the notch to fit that piece in the back of the arm. I simply use the holes in the arm to screw it to the table structure. I had to release that lever to turn the arm to my left. Now I can screw in that side. To completely insert the screws, I had to use a screwdriver. Now I have to tighten the lever, because I will only use this miter saw arm in this position. I put that piece of wood in the hole between the handle and the electric motor. It keeps the trigger on. I also have to put there this piece. And now I have a flat surface to put this piece of plywood. And I have another piece of plywood to put in the other side of the handle. I cut this piece of strip. I drilled a hole from one end to the other. And I inserted there that piece of copper pipe. The parts of the pipe protruding to each side go in the holes I made in a couple of push arms, and this will push the piece of plywood that I will put below the handle. I screwed the piece of plywood to the piece of strip with the pipe, and I also had to put a couple of pieces of marquetry to level the piece of plywood. I clamped the pieces of plywood and I screw them to the piece of wood I have in the hole between the electric motor and the handle. The push arms will lift the saw like this. I screwed a couple of drawer slides in this piece of plywood to make this kind of sled. I had to file the tip of the screws in the other side. Now I have this small block. I drilled a hole from the middle of one side to the other side. I insert there a nut with a couple of screws to hold it in place. I put it in the middle of the drawer slides. Notice that I put it near the edge, with the insert nut facing that edge, and I glue and I screw it. Now I have another piece of strip with a copper pipe protruding to each side. The dimensions of this piece are the same as the dimensions of the piece I put below the miter saw handle. But first I have to check where do I have to put it. You can see that now I have another vertical piece of board, parallel to that where I screwed the miter saw arm in the beginning of this video. And I have another one right in front of it. And I have two strips going from one side of the table to the other. The drawer slides go on those strips. Now I mark in the piece of plywood the inside face of the push arms. I mean the separation between both arms. My block with the pipe goes right in the middle of the marks, but I had to put a small piece of plywood below it, so the end of the push arms have some room and they can turn. I screw the drawer slides to the strips. And I install the push arms. After some testing, I had to cut the push arms shorter. Now everything seems to be okay. I drill a hole to pass the threaded rod. right below the height of the drawer slides, and I put there a small piece of pipe. I should fix it with some epoxy. Now I will make the crank. I mix some epoxy. The tip we can see on the top of the cap is to open the tube. I have that piece of plywood with the hole in one side to put there and insert nut. Now I put one nut and some epoxy in the end of that threaded rod, and I screw it in the insert nut, and I tighten the nut against the insert nut. I have this knob, and this bolt goes loose in the hole I drilled from side to side. I put some epoxy in the tip and I screw it in the hole I made in the other side of the crank, with a small nut to fix it in place. I make sure that the knob turns free. Now I can pass the rod through the hole. I put a washer and a nut with some epoxy to fit it in place in the other side. If I don't put this washer and the nut, the sled will push the rod out. And I screw the rod in the insert nut that I have in the small block below the sled. When the epoxy is dry, I can turn the crank to lift the saw. I need a lot of turns, but it works. Now I have to tilt the meter saw arm until the disc is perfectly at 90 degrees with the tabletop. That is why I only use one screw in the top and in the bottom of the vertical bars. If I tilt the bars, I also tilt the saw. I move them until the disc is at 90 degrees with the tabletop. I clamp them and I screw them. So far everything seems to be okay, so I screw the top board to the table structure. But the truth is that after some time using this saw, I realized that the disc had a small wobble. I am not sure if it has a twisted axis or if I have some other problem. But it was impossible to me to fix that wobble. So I had to dismantle this meter saw arm, and I installed there a circular saw. I just had to make some modifications to this homemade lift. So in the next video I will show how I attached the circular saw to make the homemade table saw with homemade lift that I currently use in my shop. Thanks for watching. Remember that if you like my videos, you can find them in my channel, and thanks for subscribing to my woodworking channel too.